Good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's first panel in a series of webinars titled When They See Us, Giving Voice to the Pain. I'm William Lake Jr., Assistant Professor of Music Education and Associate Director of Bands at the Crane School of Music, and tonight's facilitator. The heart of this experience arrived to me as a response to watching 3 consecutive murders occur in our country: Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and George Floyd. I watched Ahmaud Arbery be hunted like game. I watched the last 8 minutes and 46 seconds of George Floyd's life, and I grieved the negligence surrounding the death of Breonna Taylor. I felt paralyzed. I felt hopeless. I felt for the first time in my life that I simply couldn't do anything to change these outcomes. In that moment of darkness, I then decided that these sentiments were only true if I didn't do something. So tonight's webinar starts discussion not only around the systemic inequality of the police force in situations involving Black people, but the start of a long and overdue conversation in my small space of influence. Tonight, I have invited 9 awesome people to help answer difficult questions submitted anonymously. To our guests, I appreciate your vulnerability, transparency, and your expertise. I invite all of our panelists now to introduce ourselves. We will start with Reverend Eddie Hales.
Good evening to everyone. Again, I'm Reverend Eddie Hales. I'm a seasoned civil rights attorney, and I'm also a ordained Baptist minister. I serve as a managing director and general counsel for a national racial justice organization that supports organizing efforts at the local level, informed by careful legal reasoning and strategic communications. I was born of a civil rights family. My father was a civil rights activist in the 50s, the 60s, and all the way until his death. I sat at a dinner table hearing the stories of African Americans going into the Deep South seeking ways to bring about not only racial harmony, but empowerment, and it inspired me to want to be a civil rights attorney. By the time I got to high school, I felt that all of the victories had been won, that I had passed my time, and yet here we are in a new era facing some of the very same barriers, difficulties, and injustices that my dad did many decades ago. But I'm happy to appear on this panel and hope my responses to questions will be helpful.
Reverend Hales, we thank you for being here with us. Next, we will have Ms. Lassina Branch.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Lassina Branch. I am a native of Dorchester County, Maryland, born and raised on the shore. Did my academic matriculation as a graduate of Dorchester County Public Schools. I then went to Morgan State University, where I earned a degree in psychology, then attended Bowie State University and earned a degree in school counseling. I'm currently working on my doctorate at the University of Maryland Eastern Shore in organizational leadership. I currently serve in the capacity as supervisor of school counselors for Dorchester County Public Schools. Prior to that, I served 8 years as a high school counselor. So definitely school counseling is my wheelhouse and what I love. So I'm very excited tonight to be able to contribute from that perspective, as well as from my perspective as youth director at my local church, as well as being an almost mommy to a very amazing and incredible, strong, kicking little Black boy. So I'm very excited. Thank you again, Dr. Lake, for the invitation.
Thank you for being with us, you and your soon coming pride and joy. We'll next have Ms. Fulton.
Okay, I had to unmute myself. Hello, everyone. First of all, this is the biggest crowd I've spoke to, so excuse my nerves. So anyway, about me, I'm a filmmaker. I work in television. I work at a local CBS affiliate. I'm from Philadelphia, born and raised, Southwest Philadelphia. I currently live in the DC area. And I'm low-key an activist. I've been doing this. I've been speaking out on racial injustice since I was a kid, about 12 or 13. So this is nothing new to me, and I'm glad to be here.
Thank you for joining us. Next, we will have Dr. Lorenzo Hughes.
Good evening. It is my high honor and esteemed privilege to be with you this evening to share a bit of my expertise as it relates to equity. In my professional capacity, what helps me pay the mortgage is in my capacity as the senior manager for school support and equitable practices with Anne Arundel County Public Schools in the Office of Equity and Accelerated Student Achievement. I have, in about my 25th year of education, and I have experience from the classroom to the boardroom, having been a classroom teacher, assistant principal, high school principal, assistant superintendent for instruction, and now in my current capacity, and done a little bit of adjunct work. Quite excited about the work of equity and how I got here, and in my role in trying to leverage resources and empower especially African American students. I care about all students, but it's the African American students who have been consistently marginalized, and in my work in helping to get their voices heard and providing professional development and consultation and support to executive and school leadership and teachers around equity. I have some very esteemed colleagues who are joining me in the work and leading the work. Especially, I'm excited about the work I'm doing around an social justice, anti-racist social justice leadership lending library, where we're providing a venue for people to take ownership of their learning instead of asking those of color how to get this thing done, having a resource put in place. And so I do have an esteemed colleague, Dr. Heidi Oliver Ogilvie, who has provided that for them. And so I'm excited about that work, and I'm excited again to share and be a part of this august panel this evening. So thank you so much for the invitation, Dr. Lake.
Thank you, Dr. Hughes. Next, we will have Dr. Albert Lee.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Albert Lee. I am Associate Professor of Voice and Opera at the University of Nevada, Reno. I still sing actively. My bachelor's degree was from the University of Connecticut, my master's from the Juilliard School, and a doctor of music from Florida State University. Coming out this summer, I have my first book chapter coming out entitled "All You Have Gotten Is Tokenism." It's a book, a behavioral health in psychology book that I was invited to write with a friend, and so I'm using some of my expertise from research from that and work I've done heading several diversity efforts on the campus of the University of Nevada, and hoping that I can shed light on some of these questions that have been asked. Thank you so much for the invitation to be here.
Thank you. Next, we will have Ms. Wendy Opolos. Yeah.
Hi, everybody. My name is Wendy Apollos.
I'm sorry.
It's okay. Happens all the time. My name is Wendy Apollos, and I too work for Dorchester County Public Schools for the Board of Education. I support the supervisors of curriculum as well as Ms. Branch sometimes. So I definitely have been an administrative assistant for many years now, and I just do my part as well, like Ms. Fulton said, to try to be an activist in my community, represent for the Black girls that want to have a voice in this world. So I try to be active, I try to be alert, I try to learn. I'm very honored to be in a room full of so many distinguished Black people that you guys are just beautiful. So thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Next, we will have Ms. Camille French, Esquire.
Well, good evening, everyone. I'm delighted to join you all as well. I am an assistant city attorney for the city of Winston-Salem, North Carolina, where I am an HR attorney for the city. I am married and I have 3 children. I have an older son, a middle daughter, and a younger son. And so these times and what is going on. So Lasaina, congratulations to you. But you know, I know you are concerned, and we will get through this together as mothers, as sisters. But I am delighted to be on the panel tonight. I am encouraged by all that I am seeing. I think that we definitely have some direction and some time to frame this discussion and make sure that we're making sure that we are putting things in place and taking this to the next level. So I am delighted to hear from you all and learn from you all as well. So Thank you all, and thank you, Dr. Lake, for inviting me to be a part of tonight.
No, thank you. Next, we will have Reverend Tammy Brantley.
Good evening. I'm Reverend Tammy Brantley. I come from a small town in Georgia by the name of Fitzgerald, Georgia, where I went to high school, all of my elementary education. I did my undergraduate studies at the Fort Valley State University, where I received a business degree in sales and marketing. And that's how I got to the DC, Maryland, Virginia area for 13 years. I worked in business sales for United Parcel Service, what we know as UPS, the big brown truck. And then I received a call to go into full-time ministry, which was not my initial call. I wanted to be a director of sales, but when God calls, we go. With that, I then received my Master's of Divinity from Howard University. And then I did some post-youth ministry studies at Princeton United Theological Seminary. And here I am, 20 years later. I have been serving in youth ministry, and in my current capacity, I am proud to say I'm the youth pastor of the Greater Gaithersburg Youth Ministry, which is an intentional ministry built on multiculturalism. And so the communities that I serve is encompassed of what heaven looks like. And it is my pleasure to be here to serve.
Thank you so much, Reverend Brantley. And last but not least, we have Mayor Candace Hollingsworth.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Lake, for the invitation and just for convening this space. I'm Candace Hollingsworth. I'm the mayor of the city of Hyattsville. It's right outside of Northeast DC. I've been in elected office 9 years this past May. I was a council member for 4 years first. I'm now serving in my second term as mayor. But I think for the purposes of the discussion this evening, I definitely want to share a little bit about, I guess, the backstory of the passion around me. I'm a Southern girl that's living in Maryland. So I am from Memphis, Tennessee originally, born and raised. That is what colors a lot of my perspectives on things. And then I had these wonderful experiences at institutions of higher learning that I'm appreciative for, but at the same time, they come with a lot of lessons. I got my bachelor's degree in African American Studies from Emory University in Atlanta. And I got my master's in public policy, specifically focused on education, family, and social policy from Georgetown University here in DC. So I'm looking forward to the conversation. Let's do it, I guess.
I'm sorry, can I cut in, Will?
Yeah, absolutely.
I didn't represent my school. I went to Bowie State too, by the way. So I just wanted to throw that out there. I majored in broadcast journalism and television. So I had to rep my school. So can't forget that. So
absolutely.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. So ladies and gentlemen, thank you all again for being here with us. We're going to actually go to a clip to get our first question off the ground. It comes from the hit sitcom Scandal. And this will just frame our beginning discussion.
Did I not raise you for better? How many times have I told you you have to be what? You have to be what?
Twice.
What?
Twice as good.
Twice as good as them to get half of what they have.
A very short clip, but I can remember my mother having this same conversation with me when I was little, and I would imagine that you all of our panelists remember a time when this conversation was very real to you. So our first question is, considering the challenges of African Americans in our country, how did your family support your success in life? And so this is a question offered to everyone, just keeping everyone mindful. We have 35 questions to get through. So please, if you can be brief in your answers, but we will try to move as expeditiously as possible as we can through each one. So let's start with Dr. Lorenzo Hughes.
I had the great fortune of being brought up in a very loving and Christ-filled family, full of faith, and it was made known to all of me and my siblings as we were coming up that we were as good as, but not better than anyone else. And so I went through life just knowing, having a good sense of self, grounded in faith. And so, yes, I did hear, I do remember my parents letting us know, again, you have to be twice as good to get half as much. But again, don't be intimidated by anyone else. And so I do take that with me today, even up to today. And so I do not concern myself. There's a proverb which says that a lion doesn't concern itself with the opinion of sheep. And so I take that with me everywhere I do go. Again, realizing, going back to my parents' advice, admonishment, that you are as good as, but not better than anyone else.
Thank you, Dr. Hughes. Ms. Branch?
So the number one thing that sticks out, I had a conversation with my great grandmother who lived until she was 93. And she said to me very clearly, I remember being a young kid, your education is everything. And that's something that nobody can take away from you. And that was my lesson of that's where you work. That's where you work. You work to earn knowledge. And that knowledge will be the thing that propels you. And it's something that nobody can ever take away from you. And so that sticks with me. Even now, my family, from the time I was young, it was always an expectation that education is important and education is valued. And it was never a question of anything I wanted to strive for, that I would have that support. And so I owe all of that to my parents, my grandparents, cousins who paved the way. I think of my older cousins who went to college before I did, and being able to see that and witness that. My father was in the United States Army for 23 years. My mother was an educator. So seeing these examples, these amazing examples, there was just a standard that this is where we are, this is what we're doing, and this is what is expected of you. And those expectations have always sat with me. And it was never overbearing, but it was enforced.
Thank you. Dr. Lee, would you like to offer your answer?
Sure. I would say two things. It's standards in my family, standards that were expected of not only my mother's children, but in the spirit of it taking a village to raise a child, my mom's sisters and all of my cousins were a part of my upbringing. And so that standard was across the board. And so if you did well, you were celebrated by everyone. And if you didn't, you for lack of a better way of saying it, you got by everyone. And so that incentive, whether some people see that as positive or negative, that incentive did a lot. I would say the other thing next to standards is integrity, is that you do the work, you do your best, you're honest about it, and lies were not tolerated. And so in some ways, I'm grateful for that, that upbringing. I will also say it makes it difficult to walk in this world where we see that standards are not necessarily the modus operandi, and integrity is almost, it seems like integrity at this point is in last place, but I'm grateful for those two standards.
Absolutely. And so just because of time, as I'm watching it, I'm going to continue to work our way through our panelists. But with all of this being said, I think we all have strong influences from family first, and the ideas of, as Dr. Hughes said, being just as good as, but you're not better than. When did you come into a consciousness that there was something different about you because of your color in this narrative? So I'm going to go to Reverend Tammy Brantley to connect our previous discussion into the second question offered.
And so I was raised in, like many people have said here, in a Christ-fearing home. My mother is on the line tonight, and my mother and grandmother made sure that I understood God first and education. When I came into the consciousness, I remember my grandmother going to work one day. My grandmother did not finish high school. She was a maid. And growing up, she cleaned houses for a majority of Caucasian families. I grew up in a rural segregated South. So from the time that I was in elementary, I knew that I was different. In addition to that, the most pivotal thing that I remember is one day my grandmother went to pick up her check for cleaning for a woman. And I couldn't have been no more than 8 or 9 years old. And I said, why are you cleaning her house? We never went back to that house again. And I do not recall that my grandmother cleaned again. But I grew up in a town where I graduated high school in 1998 and we had segregated proms. I grew up in a town where people are living up here. It's like, you don't know how to skate, but the skating ring was not available for us to go to. But there was one. And so while my colleagues who were Caucasian growing up in high school had homecoming dances and parties that were hosted, we did not get the opportunity to experience that whatsoever. And so my entire life, as early as I can remember, I always knew that there was a difference.
Miss Apolos, if you could give your kind of take on not only success, but when did you come into a consciousness that the world will perceive you different because of your skin color?
So for me, during the introduction, I missed to mention that I was born in Kenya. So I come from Africa and I've lived internationally. I lived in Sweden for 4 years. So I didn't move to the States until I was about 12 years old. That's when I realized that I was Black. I'd always made friends with Caucasians. They were just always the ones that drew to me and vice versa. So it was natural. It was never as if their families treated me differently, or I never noticed it, I never felt it. Not until I was in the 6th grade and we moved to Maryland, I then realized that Black people are treated differently than white people. I went to an all Black school. They were probably like 3 Black or white kids that went there. So that's when I realized it, because I was seen more as the Black girl that spoke white. So it was then that I realized that there was this issue, but it didn't really bother me as such. I was more so trying to get included in with my type of people, the people that I looked like, that I never made friends with first. They were the ones that I wanted to now become friends with. It was hard. It was definitely hard because they had this notion of me being the Black girl that spoke white. So I believe that was when I really noticed that there wasn't a difference in living in the States. And then my background is I'm raised by a single mother. My mom used to have a diplomatic job, and then life changed abruptly for us. And I remember going from having drivers and just living this great life to, in 6th grade, my mom had to get a job she was working at McDonald's, the morning shift. It was just life that I wasn't used to. So I think adjusting to all that and then adjusting to the school that I went to made me realize that there is a difference in this country of how Black people are perceived. So yeah, definitely when I was in 12th grade. 12 years old.
Thank you. Ms. Fulton, can you share?
Yeah, so the thing with me, I've always been an outcast in school. So I dealt with, excuse me, a lot of feeling less than. And dare I say, amongst my own Black people, they talked about my skin complexion, how I dressed. I grew up really poor, but I didn't feel different really until when I got to high school. When I got to high school, like I said, I was the outcast, but I had white conservative Republican teachers that were teaching us, such as Huck Finn and other type of racial things that they would say, just undercover. They could take our money, but didn't like us. That's how I felt in high school. And so one of my teachers said, I'm gonna end up barefoot, pregnant, stirring spaghetti. Here I am, a college graduate. I'm in my career. I'm a filmmaker. I have my own production company. So at that point, I felt less than. And then when I went to college, I had a professor say, Well, because I'm from Southwest Philly, which is a predominantly Black area, the ghetto, as they like to say, my dreams of having a production company and starting my career is far-fetched. So it's like all these little passive aggressive thoughts came into my head. And I said, you know what? I have to prove them wrong. I have to. The kids that bothered me, the professors that talked down upon me, my thought was fight. I'm going to fight. I'm going to overcome these obstacles no matter what. And we have to really talk about as Black people how we can separate ourselves. There's colorism, you know, feeling less than because I'm dark skinned, because I'm plus size. I can really dive into it, but that's really my experience. I'm going to shut up now.
Thank you. Ms. French, if you would like to just offer your experience, when did you become conscious of your Blackness?
It was around maybe 5 or 6 years old. So I was born and raised in South Carolina, a small town called Sherrall, South Carolina, prettiest little town in Dixie. And I had a really, really good friend who was white. And she and I were thick as thieves. And it came around to her birthday. And, you know, we were talking about it. And, you know, as 5-year-olds do. And basically, you know, I was expecting an invitation to a party that she said that she was going to have. Her mother called my mother, and the party got canceled. Now, they lived close enough to us that our house was on the way to somewhere else. And we just innocently, I promise you, just this is our regular route to, let's say, the grocery store, innocently had to pass this house on the day of the party, which of course was going on. But of course, I had been lied to and was uninvited. So of course, that broke my little 5-year-old heart. And I had to, you know, ask my mom, you know, she kept driving and I was, you know, confused and asking my mother, you know, what happened. So that's when we had to have that discussion. You know, this could be why. I hope that it is not why, but this could be why this has happened. And, you know, it has happened repeatedly over the years. You know, I've had friends come to me who were white that wanted to date Black friends of mine. And, you know, I'm like, you know, hey, go for it. You know, if you like her and you want to talk to her, that's great. And then only to get crushed to find that the parents said, no, that is not an option for you. So, you know, and I found that out, of course, because the friend comes back to me to say, you know, this is what has happened and I don't know how to deal with that. So not only am I dealing with my own frustration and disappointment, I'm now having to help the friend who is just now realizing that the parents don't share the same views. So I think one of the things that I hope is going to come out of all of these discussions and all of these panels is that, and to tie it back into the first question with respect to the doing better, I don't know who got that clip, but it seems like those verbatim words have been spoken in my household many times. And so, you know, and I do agree 100% with Dr. Hughes. It wasn't about us being more or feeling that we were superior to. It was to remind us that we had the potential, that we could do better, be better, do all the things that were out there. Any expectation we could, you know, exceed it if we wanted to. All we needed to do was put our minds to it. That was preached to me as well. And so kind of in conjunction with these interactions with our white compatriots and, you know, having the disappointments and all of that, you still had that piece spoken into you about your potential and about your ability to do things. And so honestly, that's how you cope. You kind of have that foundation, and that's what helps you get through those pieces and points.
Thank you, Ms. French. Reverend Hales, can you offer your experience to the question?
Certainly, like Sister French, it's so amazing and ironic that I had a similar experience as her. In the South, I was born in Bedford, Massachusetts, west street from a jail. And not to go into detail about my experience with a white neighbor, but the thing that really made it real clear to me that that America had racial issues was as a young kid, and I'm talking about the late 50s. My parents sat down and told me that a young man, a young boy, was coming to live with us. He was a little older than me. He lived in Prince Edwards County, Virginia. The school system had been closed down because the United States Supreme Court said that all schools had to desegregate, and rather than desegregate schools, Prince Edwards County, Virginia, closed down all of its public schools and opened white academies or academies that only white students could attend. And so the word went out to pastors around the country asking if they would take on these students until the NAACP pursued their legal rights in court. And so the young man came to live with me. Two other young girls came to live with other families in New Bedford, and they all attended our church, a Union Baptist church. And I'll always remember, even I was 6 years old then, and my father invited them to come before the church and to sing a song. And they chose to sing, "We've Come This Far by Faith." And that has stuck with me. The church has stuck with me. Music has stuck with me. Civil rights has stuck with me. And recognize also that those whom much is given, much is expected. So even at 7 years old, my dad taught me something I still remember. And I would often say as a young kid, do not calculate or statistically enumerate your junior post before the process of incubation has fully been materialized. Able to articulate it cause people to say, oh, these are learned people. And indeed, my two parents coming from segregated schools, my mother in Thomasville, Georgia, where the valedictorian of the Black school, my mother had to walk 1 mile past the closest high school, which was segregated, to a dilapidated building where they studied on borrowed. The Black school got as a prize an opportunity to tour the white school. So they really impressed upon us education, getting the most that you could get.
Thank you for sharing. Mayor Hollingsworth, can you give us an idea of when did you become conscious of your Blackness in your early years growing up?
I became conscious of my Blackness from my mama, because my mom always, my mom's a coffee drinker, and she always had a cup of coffee in her hand. And I'm also a coffee drinker now, go figure. But I would ask for a sip, or she'd ask me if I wanted a sip, and she'd say, "Coffee make you Black." And then she'd say, if somebody tell you that, you say, "Black is beautiful." So that was my mom's lesson to me. And while I was aware of my Blackness at a very early age, and that it was something to be proud of, I never necessarily, growing up in Memphis, I didn't necessarily have any kind of direct experiences with someone othering me, because I think I had the benefit of going to all Black schools, even though they were high achieving all Black schools. So I was always around folks that looked like me. However, I had this very interesting interplay with my family, my dad's side of the family that's in North Mississippi. And, you know, while I'm having this experience in Memphis, which, you know, you're talking about maybe 15, 20 miles away, right? Having this experience in Memphis growing up. My cousins, who are like 2-3 years, you know, older than me, are attending school with segregated beauty queens and a white and Black prom queen and king, and white and Black homecoming king and queen. So that was a very real experience, and it was odd. It wasn't something that I understood. But when I saw it firsthand, and I think what really caused me to pivot into understanding the depths of inequities that surround Black life, was when I went to boarding school for high school. That's something you don't necessarily do, especially not a Southern girl from Memphis, but I went to New Hampshire for boarding school for my last 2 years of high school. And being in that environment where, you know, you're like one of 50, I think there were 52 Black kids out of about a student body of about 1,000. we became like family. And it was there that I recognized the importance of community among Black people and how you use community to help advance things and make it better for those who come behind you. So, you know, you had your Black seniors who made sure they set things up in place so that the Black freshmen behind them, you know, had something to come to, or that the juniors knew what they needed to do the next year, who to look out for, and that kind of thing. And that is a thing that really has fueled me going forward is, you know, we have a responsibility to our communities to make sure that we protect the legacy of our elders. And I think that in part comes from one of the things that my mom has always taught me, which was that you never look down your nose on anybody. She's like, you get the benefit of these great educations, but you know, that doesn't mean that you're better than the person that was still left at home and you had this great opportunity. And so while, you know, there's of course that pull to want to be the best so that you are a great example for your race or for your community, there's still also the very real obligation to not allow exceptionalism to be something that pushes you further away from your community and being connected in a way that allows you to advance causes that, while you may not necessarily personally experience it, many others do. You're just in a position to actually do something about it.
Thank you so much for your answer. And as I listen to all of the answers from all of us here, I hear common threads of accountability, humility, and integrity. And that's something that I would imagine that even people who are outside of the Black community, those values are instilled in them just as they're instilled in us. However, there is the slight difference that there is an element of race that comes into play that we often are introduced to earlier in life in order to understand just how the negotiations socially may play out for all of us. So I'm going to go into our next question. I do want to remind our panelists that if you can keep your answers as brief as possible, so that way we might go all the way to our last question as our goal. So I have a question for Wendy first. Wendy, I'm sure you saw the 8-minute and 46-second video of George Floyd being murdered by a police officer. What were some of your initial reactions to that?
So I actually forced myself to watch it because we see it all the time. We know how they go, starts this way and it ends this way. However, just because I put myself in a position where I want to be aware, I want to be active, and I want to be involved, I made sure that I did watch it just because I want to feel those emotions with everybody else. So anger, definitely anger. And you're sad because it's seen by everybody. You're very sad because you don't know who's able to stop it. I remember seeing posts like, "Don't record me being murdered, help me." And so at this point, it's weird how people rationalize that and expect you to go and tackle on this person who has who isn't being held accountable for their actions. So you see it being played all the time, that these people are not being held accountable for their actions. So there's a sense of anger that you get because even the people recording this are helpless. There is no who can police the police at this point. So it's very sad that you have a community of people who are seen as an authority figure, but yet the abuse of power is just, it saddens you that you don't know where to go with it. You don't know how to, because you become numb to feeling how you see a man getting killed all the time and they haven't done anything for it. And if they have done anything for it, even still, you don't know how to do your job. So at this point, you lose respect for these people. You start to think, I mean, what's the point of even having them as? So it's just very disheartening to me, honestly.
Thank you for sharing that. And this next question I will extend to Ms. Branch. Ms. Branch, continuing this experience of watching George Floyd being murdered, and if you're like me on Facebook after this, many of my white friends would respond and say they just don't know what to do in order to empathize with, the sentiment that's being shared by the Black community after watching this. Can you respond to maybe either how does that make you feel in that question itself, and any thoughts that you have as far as what you would recommend and how for people outside of the Black community to be able to empathize? Like, what do you say? What can you say in those moments?
So initially, what I would say is less is more. You don't have to say a lot. Sometimes just being present and being available, being an ear. One of the things as a counselor that we always talk about when we're advocating for our students is that we're not here to impress upon you our opinions or our views or our biases. We are here to be a sounding board for you as you are navigating through and working through. And it's the same exact thing. I would share with any person who's not Black. All you have to do is be present and be an ear, especially when the emotions are high, when the emotions are fresh. Like just being very frank, nobody wants to hear an opinion at that point. I just need to emote. I need to get it out. I need to feel this. I need to go through my authentic reaction to this. And I don't need you to impose your view upon me while I'm doing that. I just need to have this reaction, and I just need you to be present at that point. And that's the most helpful thing that you could do. I think that everybody felt that the humanity in that scenario, as the time was just going, where's your humanity? Where is your humanity? I think was probably the gut wrenching, just tugged at my heart. Like, where is your humanity? You like literally see this person who is gasping, trying to breathe, and not feeling any sort of remorse, even in that moment. So that would be my thought, would just be present as you're being an ally for somebody who is Black, who is experiencing this, who has experienced this. This is not the first video we've seen where someone has died. And that is crazy in and of itself. We talk about it so often like it's normal. It's not normal. And so recognize that it's not normal, and allow your friend that is Black, that is experiencing this, to experience it, and just be present.
Lasanya, thank you for your response. I've been making the connection of what to say for my friends who are struggling in this area as far as what words to say. I've told them, think about this just as you would as a family that is experiencing grief, like the fragility that you enter into that space. It's with that same amount of compassion that sometimes all we can say is, in sympathy, I'm thinking of you, or I'm praying for you, or, I'm with you. And, as a person who's experienced grief very close to me, it's no amount of words will ever truly satisfy anything for what that person's truly feeling. And sometimes less is often more, and just knowing that people are around goes really, really far in experiences like that. So thank you for that. So we need to see better screening of officers being hired into law enforcement. As an educator, we have all kinds of tests and hurdles and certifications that we go through in order to get our certification. I think that we all would agree that there's very few occupations that actually don't come with some sort of screening system. However, on the community side, what can be done to work more closely with the police to change the relationship between the community and law enforcement? And I'm going to send this question to Ms. Fulton. Again, remember our time, everyone.
Okay, I'll try to be quick. So what needs to happen to regain that trust is, for one, get rid of the rotten apples. There's so many good officers out here. Yes, I agree. But good officers are in fear of speaking up against their bad colleagues. So once we can do a sweep of the bad guys, per se, then we can start to gain some trust back. But every week is a hashtag. I swear it feels like every week. Before we can process one hashtag, here comes another hashtag. So maybe once the hashtag slow down, maybe we can trust them again. However, it's going to take a long time to regain that trust, because it's a systematic, oppressive attitudes and laws that has been ingrained in this country from the beginning. So we have to go through all them years of processing, of learning to gain that trust again. So I don't know if it'll happen in our lifetime, but we can at least start there.
Absolutely, thank you. And Mayor Hollingsworth, can you answer from your kind of perspective as far as like how can the community begin to partner with the police in order to make better on the relationship that we have together?
So that's an interesting question for me, because there are times when I look at videos, people are so excited about, this officer dancing with this person, and like, this is how you build community. That ain't how you build community. Like we hold sometimes the bar is so low for folks that are perceived as being habitual kind of rule breakers, that when you have at least one person that's doing things right, it's like, yay, that, this is going to make me feel much better about the future of this. I think where it stems from is for leadership of departments, I think, and this is, again, my personal opinion, okay? So I think leadership of departments has to encourage officers to find and develop their own authentic personalities. I think that many times people get into any organization, honestly, that has kind of a code or ethos, that you start to adopt that code or ethos, even if it's not something that aligns with where you are, your heart and spirit are. And when you have people who are out rigid and acting like robots and not finding the ways that they can even as a human connect with another human, those relationships can erode. The other piece for me is, law enforcement, I've said this in other venues, law enforcement is one thing, but then the other thing is about the contract that people have with one another. Because I see it at times in our community where you have folks who feel that law enforcement is their personal law enforcement, and that law enforcement is there to enforce the rules that they perceive should be applied to a community. And when those people have, a groundswell of support, or they feel that they have certain, politicians or whomever on their side, they then use their own personal will, using law enforcement to weaponize in their communities. And I think we need to get really back to how you build communities, period, to make sure to get people to realize that the problem is also why people call the police in the very first place. And when we address those things, we start getting to other areas. Sorry.
No problem. So I see that two of our panelists want to chime in. So we'll first go to Dr. Lee for a response to this question.
So I was just, as this question went out, and I'm glad that Mayor Hollingsworth was able to answer in her role as an elected official. I think we all have to understand that the truth of the matter is that the system of policing is actually working exactly as it was designed to. And when we understand the history of policing in America, we will understand that what we are seeing is not really an anomaly. And in many respects, the police were and are the personal emissaries of certain people in the community to bind and keep in control other members of the community. And so it is in that spirit that I think where if we begin having conversations around movements to defund and abolish and all that kind of stuff, where we can get into semantics and get lost. But I think when you really understand that the foundation of policing is that, we can then start to have a real conversation about real change, and not this sort of tweaking around the edges to continue doing what we've been doing. The system is working as it was created.
And I think I saw Ms. French, you had your hand up as well to respond.
I did very quickly because I know you want to move on. I wanted to just echo one thing that Mayor Hollingsworth said, which is about the community piece, working together in community matters. We did have, I think it was around the time that we lost Philando Castile, that we at my church decided we need to hear from someone in that community to decide, what is really going on? What is the thought process behind where we got? How did we get here? So we invited a member of our local police force to the church to sit and have a discussion with us as a community and talk to us. And one of the things that he said really stuck with me is that he said there used to be a time where we were in the community interacting with those persons whom we were supposed to be serving and protecting. And when you're doing that, not necessarily the dancing and all of that, and I've seen those videos as well, but the just walking by and talking to the people sitting on their porches and getting to know those people who you are, sworn to protect and serve makes a difference. And he said we have gotten so far away from that in some ways because of other concerns, various reasons, lack of personnel and staff, that we're not able to really do that and build those community partnerships whereby we have a trust with them and them with us, and we're actually policing neighborhoods together. We've gotten away from that because, we look out for one another in our communities. We have always done that. And when we have someone come in, it is, maybe they're an outsider, maybe they're not, but we try to embrace them to a point where, we're interacting. And so that community piece, I think, has been lost. The other piece that I have heard from several people that are frustrated is that they have tried to have forums as well in terms of, let's talk about the state of things. Let's talk about how we move things forward. Let's as a neighborhood, as a community, as a city or what have you, decide what we want policing to look like in our communities. And those are very poorly attended. So, when people are making the effort to say, let's put our voices out there and get the voices heard, and what do we want to see, we need to show up, and we need to make our voices heard, and we need to make sure that we are demanding what it is we want policing to look like. Now, agreed, yes, Dr. Lee, the system is working, but we as the people can change the system. But we do need to get engaged and involved in some of the comments that I have heard. And I just want to put that out there.
Thank you so much. Reverend Hales, here goes my question to you. Okay. You've seen, law from like post-civil rights era to now. You've seen the engagement of police and how like the legality of just community comes together, the issues with it. One of the big questions that now are buzzing in many communities is the answer to defund the police. Reverend Hales, we need you to unmute your mic.
Yes, I say yes, we have to raise the question of defunding the police, reimagining public safety, making a way for the police not to be involved in matters that can involve others with the expertise. If somebody is presenting a $20 forged bill, you don't need an armed militia coming to arrest him. If somebody falls asleep in a car at a Wendy's drive-through, you don't need an armed militia to come and move the car, especially when the person said, I could walk two blocks away to my sister's home. We need to reimagine public safety. And if it calls for the demand to defund police, and I understand it because I work with Black Lives Matter, hashtag Black Lives Matter, the movement for Black Lives Matter. In my day, we raised a fist and we talked about Black power. And people were saying, no, you can't say that. Talk about civil rights, talk about equal rights. That's too radical. No, but it caused, it created a momentum And so when people say defund the police, I know what they're talking about. They're talking about reimagining public safety so that the people who live on our blocks, who know folks on the blocks, get jobs that they don't have right now to help protect their own communities, to find standards of justice that work. Because right now, the police are not working to protect and serve. They are murdering our unarmed citizens, and it must stop.
Thank you so much for that answer. And I've seen the education community quite often has actually drawn a connection between defunding the police and the same way that we've done kind of real disservice when it comes to budgets with education. And all of us teachers are still doing great work. Obviously, we would love to have more money, but actually, I think it's because these funds are being used in so many different ways within the education system. Now that we have mental health specialists inside of education spaces, we have so many other resources that we have evolved in the education sector in order to support our students. And so I'm going to go off my own script. Dr. Hughes, like, do you see that there is a connection between this idea of defunding the police and what's happened in education over the past few years? I think there's a similarity. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. I would love to hear your thoughts about that.
It always amazes me how they're so quick to give budgets to law enforcement, but yet and still budgets and school budgets are always cut. And not being able to see that, because research lets us know that, by as early as third grade, unfortunately, we were able to be able to plot a trajectory for students if they're going to go into possibly enter into the prison system. So yes, I do see that. If they would just understand that if we're able to get the kids reading at the appropriate age, if we're able to give them the funding to get them ready, enter school ready to learn, so that they are reading on time, reading when they're supposed to, and they're able to access the jobs and careers when they grow up, it lessens the opportunity for them to interface with the justice system. Because first it starts the juvenile justice system, which then goes over into the adult system. So, last night our district had a student forum, and one of the things that the student says, in some cases we have more SROs in our schools than we have counselors. That's a problem. The fact that we do, that we're having these armed men in our schools, and we do want to make sure that we have a safe environment for our students. But again, I do think in defunding the police, I think it's more so a reappropriation of those funds, because if we could make sure we get those kids, when they're in education, identify those mental health needs, give them coping mechanisms so they can deal with the emotions, then we're not going to have to engage the police. And so again, instead of heightening the budget for police, let's give the money to the teachers. And I thought that we had solved this when we went to quarantine, and people thought teachers did absolutely nothing until they had a chance to educate their own kids in their own houses. And then the importance of teachers began to grow exponentially. So yes, reallocate those funds. We'll take them over in education to better those kids.
Thank you so much for that connection. So we're going to go to the topic of religion. So how has the Christian Bible been used as propaganda for colonialism and racism? And we'll give this question to Reverend Tammy Brantley, and then maybe follow it back up with Reverend Hales. And the question has been asked in the chat. Will the audience have an opportunity to ask questions? These questions actually were fielded from folks that are watching, okay? And so in order for us to kind of keep ourselves working through all of the many nuances of this discussion, we already have our questions that are here. So I invite you to listen and not think of other things as far as inquiry to our panelists. Reverend Brantley?
The Bible is still being used as a propaganda. It hasn't stopped being used. We see it in slavery, and we see it in the scripture context where many continue to have slaves and use the scripture, slaves, obey your master. We see it when people go into third world countries under the auspices of, we want to offer you Jesus, but what they need is water, and they need food, and they need shelter, and they need clothing. And so when you look at the Bible, it's easy to use that to colonize people if we're not careful, because everybody's looking for a way out, a savior, a deliverer. And so for many, especially those who, from slavery, from those who are living in third world countries, for those who are looking for a way out, Jesus provides that way out. The Bible provides us with a faith and a hope. And for those of us who understand how to read and interpret and utilize the Bible, there is a thin line between how you preach what the gospel is saying and how you use the gospel for the benefit of financial gain and the benefit of systematic oppression and systematic differences. And I think we still see that even in today's society, where we want to give people Jesus, but we want to give you our version of who Jesus is to us. And so that continues the colonization of Jesus. My Jesus, if I understand my Jesus correctly, in the book of Acts, it's all nations. He came in the upper room. And he spoke in their native language. They interpreted in their native languages, which means Jesus and the native language of who we are, if we're not careful, we will continue to use the Bible as propaganda because it's convenient, versus taking the time to actually study the Bible and interpret what those scriptures mean to deliver and to free and to transform lives.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you. Reverend Hales, do you have anything to add?
Yes, we preach a liberation theology. And I know just this past week at Mount Moriah Baptist Church in Washington, D.C., led a Bible study on 1 Kings chapter 12, verses 1 through 25, that talks about, well, I called it a righteous rebellion, when the son of Solomon, King Rehoboam, was asked by the people who suffered injustice under Solomon if he would take the yoke off their neck. And he said no, he was going to make it even harsher. And there was a righteous uprising, as we see today, with the knee on the neck of George Floyd. There was a righteous rebellion. The people asked for that knee to get off our neck. And so we find stories like that throughout the Bible. And even when we go to the Valley of Dry Bones, Southwest Philadelphia was mentioned. There's a place called the Bottom. That's how they see many poor Black communities at the bottom, to the valley, the mighty army. And that's what we see today.
Thank you so much for that answer. And so then continuing with another question, the idea of religion, and I'll throw this to either Reverend Brantley or Reverend Hales. So why are churches, even in the same denomination, still segregated? I think Reverend Brantley.
Woo. I read a book by Dwayne Elmer, which was entitled Cross-Cultural Servanthood. It actually was a book that we did about a year ago in one of the churches I serve. So for those who missed the introduction, I currently serve in a 3-church setting, a multicultural congregation, which is an immigrant, Latino, Caribbean, African, Caucasian, African-American community, African-American church, and a Caucasian church. I just wanted to set that up before I say that. In anything that you do, regardless of denomination, there has to be a sense of intentionality. Do we want to worship together? And understanding the intentionality of whether or not we want to worship together. Every culture brings different styles and forms to worship to the table. And in order to build our churches in a place where we are intentional about having multicultural worship, that means that we have to also have multicultural openness and relationships with others in order to understand the context in which we are preaching and ministering to. What I say when I say that, I say if I'm going to preach a sermon, I have to understand the environment and the pews that I am preaching to. And if I want to change my churches, and I'm not saying mine because I'm not the lead pastor, let me caveat that. I'm the youth pastor. If we want to change and see more churches coming together across the line, then we are going to have some conversation and multicultural leadership at the top. And the multicultural leadership at the top brings in the worship planning. It is bringing in who we are. It's bringing in, it brings in a element of how to teach in the African-American church. What does liturgical dance mean and where does it come from? What is its connection to the African diaspora where our people dance as a way of a form of connecting to God? And then for those who sit in a Caucasian congregation who have been raised in a reverent way to sit and to, I mean, I have a colleague, she and I laugh all of the time. She was like, "Ooh, you get excited in church." And I sit here and I'm quiet. We have to bring who we are and all of who we are to the table in order to do that. And just like we're having this conversation tonight about racism and how it has to be eradicated, you're talking about changing churches and to have multicultural context. We got to transform some hearts and some minds and get people on the conversation of, can we love each other in the commandment of which Jesus has called us to love one another, right? So in order for our churches to come together, we are going to have to demonstrate the Christ that is in us that says, let's come to the table. Let's talk about the varied forms and styles and historical contexts of worship. And how do we authentically worship? How do we authentically worship God together and see Jesus?
Wow, great answer. I just want to invite the panelists, please look, some of the attendees have sent either questions to us. You feel free that while you're maybe not answering a question to answer those from attendees. And there's a question also in the chat for Reverend Brantley, as far as the name and the author of the book that you just mentioned. Dr. Lee, I'm glad that you have your hand up because I'm going to add a spin on this question. There's something about Reverend Brantley. She mentioned about authenticity in worship and who we are. And although there may be different cultural ways that we express worship, but there's this word called authenticity. She talked about liturgical dance and that even, liturgical dance is now used in all different types of churches, all different types of denominations, but that comes from actual movement in worship from Africa. And so it's important that even in spaces where we don't have Black culture, to still teach about that culture, so that way that we're teaching from a space of historical accuracy. So there's a question here that relates to music education in the same mindset. And so the question is, as an aspiring choir director, I would like to hear your thoughts about a white person teaching students of all races and cultures songs from the Black community, whether it be gospel, spiritual, or traditional African songs.
So I'll say this as a classical musician, raised in a Black Methodist denomination, and at 18 having left the Methodist church and gone to a Pentecostal church, and then always singing in Catholic and Anglican communion, and actually singing in synagogues for the High Holy Days. I've had an amazing opportunity to kind of worship in many different settings, and occasionally you forget where you are. I was in an Episcopal church and the pipe organ was playing All Hail the Power of Jesus' Name. And it took everything in me not to lose my ever-loving mind. But I maintained my composure.
In a positive way, just for context, that
yes.
What Dr. Lee is saying, that the music moved him to want to express his spirituality in a vocal way that might not be appropriate for the context of more solemn spaces of worship.
I will say this:
run and shout.
There was a center aisle that I felt was mine in that moment. But
yes,
but I would say, you know, in this space of music education, that I think what is really, really important to me as a music educator in higher education is to make sure that we're not simply teaching songs so that we teach people how to sort of consume multiculturalism, but that we're actually teaching foundational principles of music to all children. So that with those foundational principles, students can go out and experience and explore all different types. And I think what often happens is we put a lot of time and effort into certain classical works, and then we toss off a spiritual, we toss off a gospel piece and say, okay, we've done our thing. And so in that, it becomes really dangerous. Here's what I would recommend. I would recommend absolutely programming all types of music. And if there is a style of music that you yourself are not well versed in, call a colleague. I am certain that in your school district or in a neighboring school district, there is someone there, or at the university level, there is someone nearby who will be able to help, and you will be able to use your resources to say, please come in. We've learned the notes, we've learned the rhythms, we've learned the text, but we don't really have it, and I don't know how to give it to them. And I think being able to admit that you don't know is one of the greatest teaching tools you'll ever give to your students, because your students will be able to say to you, sir, ma'am, I don't know. And therein lies the essence of education, which is to be able to say you don't know and find space to learn.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lee. So for our next question, and I know our panelists want to chime in, I'm sorry, we're going to have to keep going for time. Maybe we have to do a part 2 of this in a different series. But in order to get us in the mind frame of our next section of conversation, I have another clip that I would like to share with everyone.
North. Now, if I right now decided that I wanted to play Monopoly with you, and for 400 rounds of playing Monopoly, I didn't allow you to have any money, I didn't allow you to have anything on the board, I didn't allow for you to have anything. And then we played another 50 rounds of Monopoly, and everything that you gained and you earned while you were playing that round of Monopoly was taken from you. That was Tulsa, that was Rosewood. Those are places where we built Black economic wealth, where we were self-sufficient, where we owned our stores, where we owned our property, and they burned them to the ground. So that's 450 years. So for 400 rounds of Monopoly, you don't get to play at all. Not only do you not get to play, you have to play on the behalf of the person that you're playing against. You have to play and make money and earn wealth for them, and then you have to turn it over to them. So then for 50 years, you finally get a little bit and you're allowed to play. And every time that they don't like the way that you're playing, or that you're catching up, or that you're doing something to be self-sufficient, they burn your game. They burn your cards. They burn your Monopoly money. And then finally at the release and the onset of that, they allow you to play and they say, okay, now you catch up. Now at this point, the only way you're going to catch up in the game is if the person shares the wealth, correct? But what if every time you share the wealth, then there's psychological warfare against you to say, oh, you're an equal opportunity hire. So if I played 400 rounds of Monopoly with you and I had to play and give you every dime that I made, and then for 50 years, every time that I played, if you didn't like what I did, you got to burn it like they did in Tulsa and like they did in Rosewood, how can you win? How can you win? You can't win. The game is fixed, and they are lucky that what Black people are looking for is equality and not revenge.
That clip is a lot. I think it's one of the most eloquent statements of just the game of economy and wealth from the Black community perspective. I encourage everyone who's watching, if you have not watched the entire clip, it is an amazing experience to hear not only the passion, but the truth behind what is shared by so many people in the Black community. So this brings a prelude to my next question. What are your thoughts on reparations, and what does that look like to you? Can we go to Mayor Hollingsworth first?
So what I think about reparations is that it's absolutely necessary. And if anybody ever dare to put a dollar value on reparations, more power to you, because you honestly, you can't. It is about completely dismantling everything that we understand about this government and why it was built and who it was built for. And it's also about redistributing power and wealth across the country to those who are kind of part and parcel of our great paradox. And, you know, of course, it causes a reckoning, or at least some interesting conversations amongst Black people ourselves. And I just find it interesting that, you know, we have to sit and say, oh, I don't, you know, we sit and answer a question about whether or not we think we deserve to, our communities deserve to be made whole and to be made right as a result of the labor that we have put in. So I don't know what reparations, I can't give you a tangible item for that, but I am absolutely of the mindset that it's necessary.
Thank you so much. Dr. Hughes, so this idea of reparations and this idea of wealth, what I understand also is that it's not only just financial, as in green money, there's also what is termed cultural capital, meaning it's the other things that also contribute to wealth status and as an asset. So education would be one of those things. And affirmative action ends up being one of those things that I think began to try to right size some of the disparity when it comes to education. So is that enough? Or how do we continue to right the wrongs in these systems that are connected to the past?
I don't think there's enough money, enough resources to actually do that whatsoever. You know, let's just go to a more recent example with regard to reparations or not. It's amazing to me that they found $3 trillion when the haves began to have not, and that we were able to give all this money to them because, as I was sharing with some of my colleagues, that, you know, even though people are talking about the trauma that people are experiencing because of this pandemic, I let them know that this is the norm for a lot of our kids. And that is, I would liken that to the African-American community and how she very eloquently broke that history down for us by using the Monopoly game, that we have always been, we've always been having to run with, you know, with one arm tied behind our back, both legs amputated, you know, all muscles having atrophy. We've always been, that has always been our case. And so the thing of it is, they need to be finding stimulus packages to invest in our communities. They were intentional about crippling us with the redlining and all of that, with not allowing us to have those loans. You know, even in education, we talk about, you know, the cultural capital. We're still going through right now. I do know that from our office, we're actually right now sitting side by side with curriculum writers to make sure that we are presenting an accurate history, and that we're making sure that our curriculum is not presenting any demographic, particularly African Americans, but any demographic, in a disparaging way. And so, yes, we need to do everything we can, because again, and Cornell West said it last week, you know, Dr. West said it last week on talk show, just as she said, it is a good thing that we are asking for just what's due us and not trying to get revenge. And that's what the dominant culture is so afraid of. And that's why we still have the support for the idiot in chief, is because too many people are too worried about the fact of, if we actually, you know, take over again. There's an excellent book that can actually sum up this question as I bring my comments to a close. Jonathan Metzl has an excellent book called Dying of Whiteness. And in Dying of Whiteness, he talks about how essentially again, that the white community, again, are literally dying and sacrificing themselves because they feel like trying to do anything to help any of us, people of color, they'd rather die themselves, cutting off their nose to spite their face. So I don't think there's any way of doing it. So that's why we have got to continue to demand. And that's why I am encouraged by these protests. But what I say about these protests is that we need to go all the way through. We need to make sure those protests turn into getting to the polls, to make sure we get the right people in there so we can and after we get to the polls and get the people in there, we need to make sure the policies are changed. Because if we don't take that protest to get to the polls, to get the right people in there to change policy, that protest has become a parade.
I'm just going to allow a beat to just for that to sit in. Thank you so much, Dr. Hughes. Dr. Lee, are you unmuting for a tag team?
I just wanted to say, I think sometimes we forget that we live in a capitalist society and the game is capital. And if you have none, you can't play the game. And if you have some, and the people around you have double, triple, and generations worth, you are playing the game with one hand tied behind your back. And so you know, many of us love to we love to parade our degrees around, and we love to parade our cars around and our outfits, and we fail to realize that the people that, you know, we think are not so special are walking around here with all the capital, and not realizing that this country was built on the capital that was our bodies. And so at some point, we have to be able to actually have conversations about what the game actually is. And so that we don't go into these conversations looking for kumbaya. I'm not looking for kumbaya. Not interested. Get it right. Get the system right. Get it right. And then we can actually all go on and we can really talk about a meritocratic society, because that's not what we have right now.
Wow. Yes. And I just want to add, so it's spoken out in our conversation, it's not that Black people are looking for handouts. We're looking for what's rightfully ours. There was this imagery that I recently heard regarding this concept of privilege, which privilege we use a lot when we were talking about just this just unfair power differential that exists between the Black community and the white community. And just as an image, the person mentioned that it's like, let's say I want to be tall, or somebody wants to be taller than me. Well, maybe I actually am taller than they are, and they want to have, you know, the advantage of being taller. And so what they do is they literally chop my legs off in order to make themselves taller than who I am. And so to me, that's the same concept that we're talking about capital, where, you know, I think they were saying that it's like, I believe 7.5 families, it would take 7.5 Black families to equal the economic wealth that exists with just one Black family. And so it's a whole entire game. And I love the monopoly connection that we're also talking about the capital into this, and just, it's an impossible game. And yes, reparations, I think everyone's like, we don't know what that number is, but we've got to do something though that begins to turn the tide. And then most recently, thinking about the COVID epidemic that everyone has experienced, the amount of impact in families of color versus families that are not of color, it's just making this gap even farther and farther and farther, because many of these families were already one check from being completely under. And now we have situations where people haven't worked for months still. And I just don't know how we even begin to fix that. And I only received 1 month of a check from the government, and I have a doctorate degree. And yeah, it's not so pretty, I know, for many other people. So I do want us to keep moving forward. So here we go. Here goes the question. And we're getting really close to our time. We may go a little bit over, just so that way we can try to get some of these questions in. Panel, we might have to talk and figure out how we can maybe do a part 2, because in the part 2, this would be part 1B, because part 2 is a whole different set of people I was inviting. But this has been really fruitful discussion. But there's so many other things that I would love to unpack and get some responses here. So this question says, as a white male in the society, I know the color of my skin, affords me more opportunities and results, and me not having to worry about a lot of things that a person of color experiences on a daily basis. I now feel like I have to help drive the change we need in society. But what happens when we come across someone who just refuses to change or refuses to even see that there is a problem? I came across an All Lives Matter person recently, and this woman just refused to believe Blacks in the United States were treated unfairly. If someone cannot accept that basic premise, is it even worth spending time with them trying to change their mind? Do we simply point out their ignorance?
I was getting ready to give you, yeah.
Dr. Lee, go ahead. Go ahead.
Dr. Lee.
I'm gonna be real quick. No, move on.
Reverend Brantley.
The Bible says sometimes you got to knock the dust off your feet and keep going. You just knock the dust off your feet. Because what you cannot do, you cannot change people. But what you can do is live that which you want to be lived, right? So this person who asked that question can demonstrate what should happen. But for some people, Jesus, in order...
Go ahead.
For the person who cannot understand what's happening to Black people in that context, and the person who says that we have not been treated unfairly, who slept through the whole 401 years of slavery discussion, who has completely missed everything that has happened to people of color. Sometimes their financial wealth is so caught up into our oppression and their inability to repent of that sin, because they will have to repent of the fact that what I am living on is because of my family has oppressed someone. And so if I acknowledge the oppression, then now I have to repent from that oppression. And then I have to make a difference, because repentance without change is useless.
My God.
That's it.
And the church said,
Amen.
Amen.
Okay. All right. So we're getting close to our time. We're going to go a little bit over. So I'm going to scoot down some of my questions because some of these I really want to get to on our first session here. So we're the concept in term of anti-racist is now really becoming popular in our society. I didn't even know what it was until a couple of weeks ago. I had never heard this concept of anti-racism. I just want you to just don't be racist was the way I would express it, but anti-racist. So literally, not only not engaging in it, but then also extending it beyond, like this person is saying, like, I want to do something, like I want to say something to people who take these more racist positions. So then my question is, and I'm going to send this to Dr. Hughes and maybe Miss French. I'm using their last names because I usually call them by their first name. So this is pretty hard. Dr. Hughes, do you have any helpful advice for raising children to be actively anti-racist? This person says that his children are 4 and 2, but advice for any age is helpful.
No, actually the children can teach the adults, and that's why, and I'm not a reverend, but if y'all will just allow me reverend privileges, that's why the Bible tells us to liken ourselves to children. Because children are going to naturally love each other because that's what they do. So they're not going to do that. So no, if kids rule the world, we'd be in a much better place. Dr. Ibram Kendi, who is the author of How to Be an Anti-Racist, is an excellent book in which I think that everyone should read. He talks about the notions of either you are racist or you are anti-racist, but there's not, that is the dichotomy according to him. And according to him, and I don't quite agree with him on this notion, but he talks about how it is possible for Blacks to be racist. And in this instance, I actually care for Robin DiAngelo, the author of White Fragility, because she talks about how Blacks can't be racist because we don't have the power structure to enforce a lot of this stuff. And so I'm with her on that. But this notion of being anti-racist, he goes to the book and he does level setting. Dr. Oliver Ogilvie will be glad that I said that. But he allows you to understand the nomenclature of the races versus anti-races and how we've got to constantly, because again, we've got to be working against any systems. And he also talks about how it is because of racist laws and policies that allows for the racist to exist. And so that's why he talks about how we need to get in on a policy level to interrupt those policies so that those racist narratives don't exist. So if you've not had a chance to read Dr. Ibram Kendi's book, he was at American University. He is just now going to over to Boston University. He's going to start an anti-racist center over there. But that's the crux of it. Either you are racist or you're not, or you are anti-racist, working against.
So, Dr. Hughes, if I might piggyback on that, I think what's really important to understand about Ibram Kendi's work is that what he lays out in his first book, Stamped from the Beginning, The Definitive History of Racist Thought in America, is he establishes that the idea of racist thought. And so when he talks about Black people potentially being racist, Black people have been inculcated with racist thought our entire lives. We've been reared in it. And so decolonizing our own minds around those thoughts is absolutely crucial, because we have many, those even elected officials. Mayor Hollingsworth, I love what you have said tonight, because you're not one of these people, but many elected officials who operate under racist paradigms in their own thinking that they bring to their politics. And so if we don't start dealing with racist thinking that leads to racist policy, that then leads to hate, we don't really have a chance of really uncovering this stuff.
Ms. French, I think you wanted to chime in.
Yeah, I'm gonna piggyback on something about Dr. Kendi, because he just came to my alma mater, Wake Forest University, for our Black History Month celebration, and he spoke to us about an experience that he had as a young man, where he was invited to be a part of an oratorical contest, and in the oratorical contest, how he himself, as a young Black man, castigated his own people for their own plight. And, he said that's probably one of the most embarrassing moments. He said, and he then went on to win the competition, which was even, more frustrating for him as he got older and realized what he had done. He said, but if you think about it, I was raised in a household with two parents, and they preached the liberation theology, and we were all about, what we needed to do as a people. He said, but if I came out of that experience still castigating and having misconceptions about my own people, imagine people who have never been around in that culture and inundated with those same types of positive images and positive reinforcement. Imagine how they are now treating others, because they have no idea. They don't even have a point of reference. And I had all the references. So I just thought that was a really profound statement that he made about his personal experience. But your question though was about, my children, and what do I teach them about being anti-racist? And I will say that I teach them two things. The first one is you treat others as you desire to be treated. That was always preached to me. You approach every situation and every person with dignity and respect. And I do give my children that piece, but I also give them the piece from our auntie, Dr. Maya Angelou, who was one of my professors at Wake Forest, who also said, when a person shows you who you are, you believe them. Okay. And so what I have told my children is we give people the benefit of the doubt. When we meet them head on, we expect them to treat us with dignity and respect. We do the things that we need to do. We talk to them in a way that we would want to be spoken to. But as soon as you see that this person does not really have your best interest in mind, you have to take a different tack. And you have to decide if you're going to continue to allow that person to be a part of your circle. If it's someone in authority, who do you have that you can now go to in your village to kind of circumvent or get around that piece? Do you have a counselor? Do you have a pastor? Where, your parents, sometimes the parents can't be there. Do you have an auntie or an uncle? Someone who can continue to help you navigate in this space, because it does not matter. You have to have that support. You have to have that. So at the end of the day, those are some of the rules that I'm teaching my children. I just got this the other day. We just went randomly. I took my son to get an ice cream cone, and he was asking the man behind the counter, may I please have a sample of X, Y, and Z? And the guy gave him the sample and he said, thank you. Because that's what we do in our home. You say please and thank you and may I to each other, because we treat each other with love and dignity and respect in this house, right? So he did that same thing because that's what he had been taught. And the man was like, oh my goodness, you are such a polite young man. Now, I know some people might be like, oh, I take offense to that because, there's a whole connotation behind some of that. But I think what he was saying was, I don't get this every day. I don't get please or thank you from anybody. And what we have is an 11-year-old child in this space respecting me and saying please and thank you, which for him probably went a long way that day. Mm-hmm. So again, that's where we are. But I would be remiss if I did not say, and Dr. Lake knows this, that I do not sugarcoat things with my children. I let them know what is going on. They are very aware. And because I feel that to do that would to be a disservice to them. Especially, and I'm not saying that we don't have issues with our young women too, because again, I can call those names, right? Sandra Bland and Tatiana and Brianna, my God, we also are being killed in these streets, but I am raising 2 young Black men. And I have to let them know what is really going on out there in the world. I would be doing them a disservice to send them out. I would have done my son a disservice sending him out to college this fall, not letting him know who he is, and the fact that if he gets pulled over, they're not going to ask you for your resume. They're not going to, we keep preaching this respectability politics, and it's not happening. They're not asking you to run down the community service, son, that you did. They're not doing that. And so we have to let them know what is really going on. And so I am very honest with the children. We are a praying household. I pray over my children. I pray over my husband. I'll never forget when Philando Castile, and I saw that video on Facebook that morning, and innocently my husband decided he was going to run out. And I said, okay, babe, you run out and you do what you got to do. And about 5 minutes later, it hit me for some reason that he may not make it back home. So now you put that on top of, not knowing what he's going to face, on top of all the regular dangers that we have to face daily, meaning someone could run a red light and T-bone him in the middle of an intersection, on top of now COVID-19, on top of now all the things you have to deal with at work. You see? So we have... Yes, please, go ahead.
I'm sorry to, so I can speak from a media professional. I've been doing television for about 14 years now. And you can say as much as you want as a parent. I'm not a parent yet, but from what I can imagine, it's a lot of tough conversations. So a lot of old school parents, especially when I was growing up, is do as I say, not as I do. So you have to make sure you're walking that same walk that you expect your child to walk, number one. Number two, we deal with the media. What do we see on TV? How can I combat that, what we see on TV versus what we see in real life? So for white parents, they need to tell their children that's on TV. That's not how they really are. and break down those stereotypes. And we have to do that for ourselves. But the white people that are raising these kids have to have these uncomfortable conversations with them to break down any stereotype that they may have. We can't be with our children 24/7. They get influences from school, from video, whatever. It's a bunch of influences that our kids have, and we have to break down those barriers by walking a walk, talking a talk, and just shielding them from certain disparities that is brought upon on TV about us.
Roxanne, I think that's really nice how you said that it has to be demonstrated by the parents. So a question I have to our attendees and the person that supplied this question, that you want to raise your children to be anti-racist. My question then is, do your kids have Black playdates? Playdates are a big thing. Do they even have network or the social network in order to practice diversity and experience diversity. And the only way that's going to happen is if the parents themselves have diverse experiences and have I was great friends, and I'm gonna use names. I was great friends with Scott Lucas because his mother, Sandy Lucas, was also a teacher in Dorchester County. So I went to Scott's birthday party. So I think it really depends on, like, you can't create something out of your children that you're not able to model yourself. That's really, really, really important. So I've been in situations in stores where I've seen white children, and I know that on that day, it's the first day they've seen a Black person. You can just see it on their face because they're totally, you can see, like, I don't have the words in order to process what I'm seeing or what I'm not understanding, but that's a point at which we have to create the environment that we want our children to thrive in. Reverend Brantley, and we're going to close this at 8:45. We are 15 minutes over. So please, Reverend Brantley, and then we'll get any final comments, and then panelists will have to stay here and maybe have a quick meeting because I think our audience and our attendees want more. And there's a slew of questions that have come in from Facebook, and I just don't want us to not tackle more of these problems before we move on to the next step in all of this. And I'm seeing in the chat, if you want more, just send a please, please, please more, just to confirm that, and we'll keep going. So Reverend Brantley?
So as we were all talking about this, and I was listening to Camille and how she's raising her children, I don't have any children of my own, but as a youth pastor, one of the scriptures that consistently, I think that we don't necessarily break down what it really means to love your neighbors as yourself. A huge part of racism can be eradicated if people actually love themselves. A lot of who we are comes out of what's going on with us. And because I'm going to be good with time, as I'm watching, and I know there were some questions to me in the chat that I do want to answer, and this may go to the person who asked me a question about white pastors. One of my colleagues, and she's on tonight, we started at the same time at Mill Creek Parish. We literally started 30 days apart. She and I are both from the South. She's from North Carolina. I didn't ask permission. Sorry, I'll buy you coffee next week. But she had a child who is now 2, and Susanna is her daughter's name. She sent me, as we were sitting here, I saw a text come through that said, Susanna saw you on the screen and began to blow kisses. That is the world that we're trying to create, because right now, I love you too, Megan. Thank you. Right now, what Susanna knows is I am her mother's friend. She doesn't know we're colleagues. She doesn't know we're pastors. She doesn't know we're in the church. But what she knows is that I'm going to sing her a song that says, Susanna, I love you. And in that moment, as we were talking, for her 2-year-old daughter to come in the room to blow kisses at the screen because she saw me, the immediate thing was she doesn't see color. She sees Tammy. And that is because she sees me and her mother walking side by side. That is a demonstration of our relationship, because what children can do is pick up on, if her mother and I were inauthentic in how we love each other, then the children would pick up on that. And so that goes back to, I love me. No, first of all, let me clarify this. Not only do I love me because God says that I should, I am a member of the greatest sorority in all of the land, Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. And if there is nothing else that I have been taught by the women who have mentored and matured me into the woman that I am today, that I first must love myself before I can bring anyone else along with me. And so for the kids, as a youth pastor, it is my responsibility. Every time that I have faced racism, it's been on a church trip. And so I have to share with my Caucasian kids as we are headed to a missions trip. Your youth pastor is Black. And they look at me like, huh? I'm telling you that because if we are on a trip and I get pulled over, or my kids I don't think they recognize that either I'm Black or they just know I'm Tammy and that I care. We can be in stores together on missions trips and I get the looks like, what's she doing with it? And the reality is, for me, how I demonstrate how I love them, I love their parents, I love my church members, I love the servants of God. That is how we walk together. Yes, Madam Mayor. That's how we walk together to demonstrate that to children. And if we don't love ourselves, our children will never grasp that concept, and they will never make the necessary changes to eradicate the racism that we're faced with today.
Mayor
I was just
Hollingsworth,
going
really
to,
quick.
sorry.
Okay, go. I'm sorry. I apologize. Mayor Hollingsworth, and then what I'm going to do is show one more clip, and we'll get your final thoughts on this. And this actually will become our to be continued aspect of this. I'll just have to figure it out with the details. We'll put it up on Facebook at some point in time. This is awesome. Mayor Hollingsworth.
I was just going to say that I think another thing that parents of younger children have to recognize is that you can't also be a part of the capitalization of Black culture. So white people many times buy still this transactional with Black bodies, but in this case, it's around Black intellect, Black appearance, our food, our music, our culture, or the fact that there are Black people that live around you. Folks that intentionally seek out diverse neighborhoods, not because they want to contribute to diversity, but because they want their children to experience it. People who send their kids to the local public school, not because they feel that, oh, you know, I am going to contribute something for all these other kids, but rather I want my kids to experience a diverse community at their school, and I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure that that school works to their benefit, not to the benefit of the other kids at school. There are all these different elements. You go in these restaurants and you hear Black music, you see no Black faces. And it's just this purchasing or this transaction of Blackness that honestly makes people have the illusion that they are being anti-racist, when in actuality, they are still participating in making Black people a form of chattel. And that has to be disrupted in my opinion.
Wow, thank you. So actually, I've changed my mind. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show this clip, and we are not going to respond to this. This is going to be the cliffhanger for next week. I just want to thank all of the panelists for coming, and I'm going to screen share, and here we go. So this is our question that we will start with next week. And I don't know any of these people's schedules, you all. I'm sorry. I assume you're in the house, you're socially distancing. So I'm just thinking you have nothing to do at this hour next week, but we'll talk about it.
Kaepernick is known for sparking a movement within the NFL after he took a knee during the national anthem at a 2016 game to protest oppression and police brutality in America.
I'll continue to sit. I'm going to continue to stand with the people that are being oppressed.
And of course, President Trump weighed in
to say, get that son of a off the field right now. Out. He's fired. He's fired.
At one point in 2017, more than 200 NFL players knelt, sat, or raised their fists during the anthem. Kaepernick opted out of his contract with the San Francisco 49ers in 2017. But since becoming a free agent, Kaepernick has not been signed by another team. He claims that the NFL owners colluded against him to ruin his career. He's been since working as an activist, reportedly donating over $1 million to charity. The internet went into an uproar when Kaepernick posted a Nike ad on Twitter with the words, "Believe in something, even if it means sacrificing everything."
There we are. This is an awesome cliffhanger. It opens up so much for further discussion, especially dealing with protests now that we're seeing, and then protests then way before the recent events. I just want to thank all of the panelists from the bottom of my heart for just being so transparent, being so honest, and so passionate, and in articulating often what we don't have to talk about. That is a challenge in itself. I thank you for your expertise that you've offered, the sacrifice of time that you've given, and all of the attendees who have watched either through Zoom or on Facebook. Thank you for being with us this evening. There's going to be a part 2. I thought the part 2 was going to be something totally different, but I guess we're going to be part 1B of this maybe next week, and then we'll move everything a week later. So all of the panelists who are scheduled for next week, just go ahead and click in your Google Calendar and just slide that event down one extra week after then. I just want to say happy Juneteenth to everyone. If you don't know what Juneteenth is, Google it. And just want to say again, thank you all so much. Thank you to Mr. Rasai Elliott, Mr. Rasai Elliott for doing our background tech work. Miss Jennifer Lake and Miss Sharika Harris, who have been monitoring our Facebook page. They have been copying all kinds of questions. There's like so many questions that are in my database for next week. And thank you, everyone. Yes.
Before we end this call, today is the 5-year anniversary of the Charleston shooting. So let's make sure we remember this. 9 people prayed with this white supremacist and they ended up dead in church. So let's remember the victims 5 years later.
Absolutely. And I'm always going to remember that date because today is my father's birthday. And so that definitely sticks and strikes with me. Thank you for reminding me of that, Roxanne. So everyone, thank you so much. And in the words of Jerry Springer, take care of yourself and each other. Thank you all so much for hanging out.
Do you need us to hang
Dr.
on?
Lake. Did you need us to hang on?
Did you need
if the panelists can hang around for a little while, okay. We will convene together. But everyone who's here, as we would say, it's been great having you. You don't have to go home, but yeah. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Woo-hoo! That was
great job.